Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett. Welcome to a new episode of UFOs in the Paranormal. Guess what? It's time for episode 4 of UFOs in Your Hometown. This is a challenge I put out quite some time ago. I received a huge response. Name any location, name your hometown, and I can find a UFO encounter there. And I'm going down my list, and I'm proud to say I'm still batting 100%. UFOs are seen everywhere. And I've got 8 locations chosen by you guys, the viewers, that I found UFO cases in. And this covers not only sightings, but of course, landings, face-to-face encounters with humanoids, missing time, onboard experiences, really the entire range of UFO encounters. I'm super excited about this episode because there are a lot of humanoid cases. There's quite a bit of really amazing evidence. Everything from landing traces and animal reactions, physiological effects, radar returns, photographs, really an amazing array of evidence. And of course, cases reaching back hundreds of years, all the way up to pretty much the present day, and cases from a wide variety of locations. Not just the United States, but all over the world, at least in several locations. So today I'm going to be covering Fort Wayne, Indiana, Greenock, Scotland, Warsaw, Poland. That was really interesting for me to find encounters there. But also New Paltz, New York, St. Charles, Missouri, Boston, Massachusetts, the little town of Van Horn, Texas, and finally Grand Junction, Colorado. Some really interesting cases in all of these locations. And this is going to be a fairly long episode, so let's just get started. And the first place I'm covering today is Fort Wayne, Indiana. And this is by special request from Annex. And wow, I found some great cases. Humanoid encounters, UFO car chases, daylight discs, cases involving missing time, a really wide variety of UFO encounters. One of the first really significant Fort Wayne cases occurred at 7:55 p.m. on February 7, 1955. And this is when the crew of an American Airlines Flight 266 observed 2 groups of 5 star-like objects. 2 were in one group and 3 were in another. They estimated their altitude at about 30 to 40,000 feet, and they first appeared stationary. Then suddenly, the group of 2 darted away at high speed, followed moments later by the other 3. Now, this case made it all the way to the Air Technical Intelligence Command at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. Checks showed that there were no other aircraft in the area, but despite the expertise of the witnesses being pilots, the Air Force dismissed this case as, quote, possibly reflections. That's Project Blue Book for you. Now that same year, September 8, 1955, a Fort Wayne resident said that he watched a, quote, silvery white, very bright, circular object slightly larger than a grapefruit. And this object was hovering in the sky, he said, for a full 45 minutes. Pretty good case. Another good, solid case occurred in August of 1961 when a gentleman by the name of John Freeman and his family reported their sighting of a craft which, quote, looked like 2 big bowls, one on top of the other with a flashing light on top. Now this thing was hovering at tree top level when they saw it. It very quickly rose silently after a few seconds, and then it climbed rapidly out of sight and was gone. So it's a fairly significant encounter with a classic flying saucer. And here's another important case, I think. This one occurred on March 9, 1967 at 9:15 when a gentleman by the name of Allen Federspiel, he's a minister and a prison guard, said that he saw a group of lights in sort of an X formation. They were hovering, they blinked on and off in sequence, then seemed to rotate, kind of like a top, he said, and then shot away. He later reported his sighting to NICAP, the National Investigative Committee of Aerial Phenomena. And activity continued in Fort Wayne. For example, August 10, 1967, Fort Wayne meteorologist made the news when he watched a UFO for no less than 4 hours. He said it was flashing red and blue and white lights. And he was not the only witness, it turned out. There were hundreds of people who saw this strange light in the sky. It got a lot of attention. Military officers and astronomers were unable to identify it. And the cases continued. Here's an interesting case which occurred at 7:20 p.m. on September 23rd, 1973. The witness was turning into the Glenbrook Shopping Center. This is a huge shopping complex. When she says she saw a huge object with a rounded backside, sort of flat bottom, and 5 rows of pulsating yellow lights on the side. She watched it for a full 5 minutes or so until it moved slowly behind some trees and was gone. So this was apparently at pretty low altitude. Now here is a humanoid case, a really unusual one, which comes from Fort Wayne resident Sally Collet. It was the second week of January 12, 1979, and Sally woke up at about 6:30 a.m. on that day, unable to sleep and feeling strangely uneasy. It was still dark at that time, and when she looked outside her home, she saw this weird glowing light. And as she says, it was kind of unusual. I wasn't scared or nothing. I mean, seeing something like that could cause a body to take a heart attack. But I wasn't scared a bit. There was something real bright in the center, like a star, only brighter. It was kind of gold-colored. But the thing, see, it was sparkling like a fireworks, things shooting out all around it. So it was unusual, and she's staring at it as it's pulsating in brightness. And this is when she saw a humanoid figure, the top half of a humanoid figure, and it was moving back and forth, walking inside this bright object. And as she says, he was moving pretty slow, but all you could see was just his waist up. And he was kind of a heavy and stoop shoulder, kind of bent over a little bit. I know this don't sound right. It's so unusual. I ain't never seen nothing like it before. It's kind of unreasonable, so I hope someone else saw it beside me. So she watched this object for a good period of time, until the sun came up. The man did not reappear. She only saw this humanoid figure once. But at 7 a.m., this object was still there in the sky, so she decided she's going to call the police. The desk sergeant, Willie Ware, sent out an officer to look. He didn't see anything. But then they received another call from another lady who was reporting the same darn thing. As Sergeant Willie Ware says, she described the exact same thing to me, about the shadow of a man passing in front of this object that was kind of sparkling. That made me wonder. Now, further inquiries revealed that there was another sighting of about a week earlier of apparently the same darn thing. Sally did eventually call the newspaper to share her story. As she says, I don't pretend to know what it was. It was way above the rooftops. But there was the make of a man walking like he was walking across the floor right there in the sky. That's what I saw. So yeah, pretty interesting humanoid case, and certainly unexplained. Here's another brief but still interesting case which occurred on April 7, 1982, when 2 people were driving in the Fort Wayne area, and they said they saw this mushroom cap-shaped flying disc with hazy lights which began to pace their car, making odd but smoothly executed maneuvers. Lots of cases of UFOs following cars, and that's another one. Here's another real interesting case. It was around 1:31 a.m. on January 17, 1989, when Jim Haddix, who himself is a UFO researcher, said that he left the Woodbridge Apartments in Fort Wayne going east on St. Joe Center Road, which you can see here, and he noticed this strange object in the sky. He saw it again at treetop level as he traveled east on Route 37. Now, before reaching Hicksville, not too far away, he said this object moved about 200 feet in front of his vehicle, at which point it shone down 3 lights directly on his truck for a full half-mile as he drove down the road. Finally, he stopped, and the object moved away. He went to Hicksville, got his roommate, and returned to Fort Wayne going west on Route 37. And guess what? This object followed him again, this time accompanied by another object. Reaching Fort Wayne, the object crossed the road right in front of them. They finally chased this thing back and forth until it, quote, stopped and hovered, turned back to the west, and flew away, arcing south. Another really good case of a UFO pacing a car. Here's another case. On April 15, 1991, Mr. F. Crocker and R.T. Trethaway both observed a fast-moving object described as, quote, pear-shaped with the apex downward, round with a V-shaped tail to it. The color of it seemed a bright yellow, and strong rays of the same colored light were constantly being shot out from the main body. There's a lot of cases. Here's an impressive case of a solid object which was seen at 12:45 a.m. on October 7, 1991. This was investigated by Richard Seafried. He's a professional, very well-respected researcher. And this object was seen while the witness was driving along Route 14 near Fort Wayne. This object had portholes, was hovering stationary just above treetop level, and was totally silent. Now, here's a real interesting UFO car chase occurred near Fort Wayne. This was at 1:30 a.m. on November 29, 1991, when a 17-year-old woman was driving with her infant child, and she saw 2 bright white lights approach her vehicle, then position themselves directly behind her, and then pursued her car for a full 25 minutes. This really quite frightened her, so she finally pulled over into a private driveway and turned off her headlights, at which point this object passed directly over her car, went around the house and the surrounding area. She now got a good look at it. It was disc-shaped. So she pulled out and drove without her headlights on, and a quarter mile down the road, this object reappeared, paced her car for 5 more minutes, and then darted away. So I can only imagine how scary that must have been for her. Now here's a really compelling case involving missing time, which was researched by MUFON field investigator Roger Sugden. It was about 10 p.m. on January 25, 2005, and a woman was driving to her home near Fort Wayne when she noticed that the car ahead of her was driving so erratically that she actually feared for her own safety. The witness did. So at this point she tried to call a friend to alert her about this, but strangely her cell phone wouldn't work, and at that moment her car lost all power. And at the same moment this shooting star-like light zoomed down from the sky. And this is when she noticed that the car in front of her also lost power, and it stopped about 300 feet ahead of hers. She could now see that there was a large green and white object hovering overhead and sending down a beam of light onto the car ahead of her. And the next thing the witness knows, the light and the object are gone, so is the car ahead of her. Also, she noticed that her car and herself were both extremely cold. So she turned on her car, turned on the heater. She noticed something else real odd. A small bottle of lotion that she had with her had strangely expanded. So she contacted researchers, told them what happened. Turned out she had also had 2 previous encounters in Fort Wayne. Further investigation revealed that the family who lived in the area where she had this missing time encounter said that they saw, quote, silver balls of light. This is in the field where this UFO had appeared. Let's move on. Just a few more cases in Fort Wayne that I'd like to cover. It was just before 10 p.m. on March 22, 2008, when a boyfriend and a girlfriend saw, quote, 5 whitish discs. Now these were flying very close together, spread apart by only about 20 feet, they estimate, flying much lower than a plane, reflecting the light. Said the witness, I was shaking badly. I've always wanted to see something like that, but now I'm scared. Here's another Fort Wayne case, which was reported to field investigator Philip Devin Leach of MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, and this occurred along Highway 27 in Fort Wayne at 8:05 p.m. on April 4th, 2015. The witness described seeing a, quote, solid light. It descended from the sky. He thought it was a plane until this thing crossed the road in front of him and began to hover over some nearby trees. And he could now see it was a solid object, somewhat triangular in shape, red and white pulsating lights. And he said this thing was zigzagging down the highway in full view of many witnesses. And he followed it until it suddenly picked up speed and altitude and disappeared. But here is a final and impressive case, which was also investigated by Philip Devin Leach. It occurred 1 year later. This is 2016, 9:35 p.m. on April 12, when a Fort Wayne resident looked out her window and saw two flashing lights blinking on and off. But this is when one, to her perspective, appeared to change shape, was still blinking, then both headed west and disappeared. Philip Devin Leach, after investigating this, classified this sighting and the one before it both as, quote, unknown. Thank you for suggesting Fort Wayne, Indiana annex. It really delivered. I learned a lot. So interesting. Keep saying it. UFOs are seen everywhere, not only in the skies, but coming down for landing, picking people up, all kinds of UFO events. And that's true as well of Greenock, Scotland. And this is from special request by CE5894. And yeah, I found some amazing cases involving humanoids, fleets of UFOs, a really interesting photographic case, some pretty interesting UFO events overall. First case I'd like to talk about in Greenock comes from researcher Ron Halliday and was featured in his book UFO Scotland. And this does involve humanoids. It began around noon one day, again in 1948, when 9-year-old Linda and a school friend were walking home. And this is when they heard this loud humming sound coming from overhead. Looking up, they were amazed to see 4 strange craft. 2 looked kind of saucer-shaped and 2 more cigar-shaped, but all of them were quite low, at about roof height. The witness said the cigar-shaped objects had windows at the front, but the saucer-shaped craft had windows all around the circumference. And inside one of the saucer-shaped craft, they could see figures looking down at them through the portholes. These were more silhouettes than anything, but the girls could clearly see this, so they began to jump up and down and wave at these figures, and to their amazement, these figures waved back. They weren't close enough to see any detail as to what they looked like, but both girls felt that these objects, or the occupants inside them, were deliberately watching them. And after all this occurred, suddenly one of the cigar-shaped craft, which was much higher than the others, came swooping down, and then immediately all 4 rose up at high speed, disappeared into the clouds, and were gone. Here's another amazing case from Greenock, February of 1973. Numerous residents in the area phoned the Greenock Telegraph newspaper, reporting that, quote, balls of fire were hovering over the Greenock golf course, which you can see here. Now, some callers reported as many as 6 objects at one time. An investigation into the possibility that these might be satellites or other natural astronomical phenomena showed this to be quite unlikely, as the descriptions coming in involved objects that were much too bright for this and very low in the sky. 5 years later, February of 1978, a gentleman with the initials J.K. said he was looking out the window of the Lark Field Hospital and he saw 2 glowing objects dart across the sky and vanish. He was impressed by this, so he kept watching when, quote, yet another object like miniature suns and traveling faster than a jet plane, end quote, zipped across the sky. And here's another, same year. It was around 10 p.m. one evening in late June of 1978. when 14-year-old Roderick Buchanan, who lived at 32 Kelly Street, was returning home with his mom and aunt. And they were between Loch Tom and Win Hill Golf Course when Roderick saw, quote, something strange. This was, of course, up in the sky, and as Roderick says, we stopped in amazement to watch the phenomenon. It was pinkish orange and something like 200 feet in diameter. It made no noise, but was spinning all the time. We watched for about 2 minutes, and then it began to descend ever so slowly. It was an incredible thing. Turns out he was probably not the only one to see this, because on the same night, Norvell Paul and his 2 children, Merrill, age 13, and Allison, age 18, said that they also saw a mysterious light above Greenock. As he says, they appeared to be 400 to 500 feet above the skyline, and they lit up one by one until there were between 6 and 9 of them. They were very bright, flame-colored, and they remained motionless. We watched them for 3 minutes before they became obscured, and we did not see them again. I'm very puzzled, for I've never seen anything like this before. So yeah, apparently Greenock is a good place to see UFOs, because on May 1st, 1999 at 9:25 p.m., another resident said that he saw 5 lights performing dramatic maneuvers. They were coming together, breaking apart, doing this whole display. Another sighting occurred on February 15, 2005, when a man was walking his dog after 1 a.m., and he described seeing a large, yellow, cone-shaped craft. Now here is a very well-documented encounter which has photographic evidence. So this is quite rare. This occurred in the middle of the night in early August 2005. The witness is 14-year-old Jonathan Smith, and he was in his 11th floor flat on Belleville Street when, as he says, I woke up at about 2:30 a.m. when I heard shouting in the street. But when I looked up, I saw all the lights. I never really believed in UFOs before. Well, he certainly did now, because he was looking at them. And what he was looking at was a group of a dozen multicolored objects. They were red, blue, and green. To his credit, he quickly grabbed his camera and was able to snap a clear photograph of what he was looking at. Says Jonathan, my mates say it must be loads of planes, but they wouldn't be so close together. There are too many lights. So no, probably not planes. And in fact, he and his father, whose name is John as well, both examined the photo in an enlargement, but they were still unable to identify these lights. And as Jonathan's father says, I really don't know what it is, but I would like to get clearer images. One more case from Greenock, November 13, 2009. A metallic disc was seen over Coronation Park. And another impressive case that same year, December 25, 2009, involved Hugh and Debbie Scobie, who viewed 2 unidentified objects from Berwyn Road hovering over Larkfield. They were reportedly able to capture video footage of it, but I was not able to see this footage. Well, hearing all those events that have occurred in Greenock, Scotland, really makes me want to visit there. Not only because it's so beautiful, but maybe I'll see a UFO. You never know. But seriously, what an amazing series of events that occurred in that area. I know there's more. I'm kind of filtering out the less interesting cases of anomalous lights and focusing more on the interesting cases where the encounters are more extensive, they're more credible, there's more evidence, more witnesses, something to add to our understanding of what's going on here. So yeah, don't consider these events fully comprehensive of each location. This is really just a sampling. And the next place I'd like to cover is Warsaw, Poland. This is by special request of JG. And JG, I want to thank you because I have never really explored the UFO encounters in Warsaw before. I wasn't expecting to find as much as I did, But man, oh man, it delivered. Amazing cases, not only of sightings, but the full range. Landings, humanoids, and onboard encounters. And some are just really fascinating. I certainly learned a lot. This very early case comes from researchers Bronislaw Rezpenki and Krzysztof Piechota. It occurred in June or July of 1922 and involves 3 family members who were walking in the Targowiec area of Warsaw when suddenly they saw this object drop down from the sky. It was making a loud whistling noise and coming down so fast they thought it was going to crash. But actually, it stopped about 10 feet above the ground and began to hover. This was only about 400 feet away. They could now see that it was a flattened, silver-gray metallic sphere with a rotating ring in the middle. Now, as they watched, this ring stopped rotating and they saw what looked like windows or portholes. In fact, one of the witnesses had the strong impression that the occupants of the craft were observing them and that they were all about to be invited on board. But moments later, the craft shot up at an angle and disappeared. But apparently there were other witnesses, because a separate report describes, quote, many witnesses seeing the same kind of object, only the other witnesses said that they watched it shoot down a beam of light and then ascend with a loud noise. The next case occurred quite a few years later, on March 25, 1959. The witness is an engineer who describes seeing a silver dumbbell-shaped object with 2 different sized spheres connected by a cylinder. And get this, it was hovering directly above the Warsaw Palace of Culture and Science. This is a very prominent landmark. And as he's watching this object appeared to transform into a disc shape. Now I suspect this is a matter of perspective, but at any rate, he watched it dart away, and then it returned back to position, again becoming or appearing to be dumbbell-shaped, before departing for good. Here's another very interesting case involving humanoids. Lots of humanoids in Warsaw. This occurred in July of 1975 when a young man went to collect mushrooms in the woods outside of Warsaw when, only 45 feet away, he was amazed to see 2 3-foot-tall entities. He said that they had thin, childlike bodies, large heads, black, shiny eyes. This sounds a lot like grays. He said that they were wearing tight-fitting black coveralls, which covered their body. Now, the witness tried to move, but found himself paralyzed. And as he watched, both of these beings walked away in a strange jumping fashion and then disappeared into the forest. And once they were out of view, the witness was able to move again. And here is another really interesting one involving physiological effects, very unusual effects, in fact. This occurred at 10 p.m. on May 22nd, 1979. This is in a park in the Piastow area near Warsaw, when the witness, his name is Waldemar R., he noticed an unusual silence settling around him. And then, 15 feet away, he saw 2 yellow beams of light, which he suddenly saw were actually coming from a dark object that was floating just above the ground. So he walked up to it. He approached to within 10 feet of this object, and he could now see that it was about 9 feet wide and shaped very much like a hockey puck. He said it had green-colored geometric shapes along the edge, what looked to him like triangles and squares, trapezoids and circles. He said the upper side had a sort of H or E-shaped symbol or protuberance right on top, and it was radiating this red light. Now, this craft itself was resting on what looked like 3 small landing legs. And as he watched, this object suddenly blazed with intense white blue light. When it did this, Waldemar felt a burning sensation on his face, which, as you can imagine, frightened him, so he fled straight home. He woke up the next morning feeling somewhat ill. He said he had this weird, heavy sensation in his head. And over the next few weeks, he woke up to find that there were abscesses filled with dried blood on his face. He connects this to his coming really close to this object. And the strangeness continued, because it was between 6 or 7 p.m. on January 15, 1986, when Joseph K., age 42, was returning from his job as a plumber to his home on Wiktorska Street. This is in the Mokotów area of Warsaw. And you can see this street here. It's not a terribly long street. At any rate, Joseph was carrying his plumber tools along with him in a little briefcase. And this is when he noticed a dull silver saucer-shaped craft, not very big, about 15 feet wide, 6 feet high, which was landing on an empty alley between two buildings. He could see a bright yellow light was emanating from an opening on top of this craft. So he became curious, and he approached right up to it. In fact, he was about 2 steps away from this object when a female figure dressed entirely in black exited from the top of the craft. She looked, he estimated, about 30 years old, but a normal human-looking person. And she beckoned for him to come closer. And this is when Joseph said he found himself becoming strangely passive. As he says, "She took my will. I became humble, like a gentle man, and I knew I was ready to fulfill all her wishes." So, next thing he knows, he's seeing 2, what he described as frog-like humanoids, dressed in overalls with hoods. He found himself standing between them, and they grabbed his arms on either side, and he found himself floating up through this weird tunnel of yellow light. And it went on for several minutes, he said. This just surprised Joseph, as the object looked pretty small from outside and appeared bigger on the inside. And he found himself inside this brightly illuminated room. These figures ordered him to lay down, and as he did, he lost consciousness. His next memory was of waking up, and he was standing by his front door. Physically, he felt fine, but he did notice 3 strange things. 1, he was wearing his jacket inside out. 2, all his metal plumbing tools were now magnetically attached to each other. And 3, his suitcase was gone, never to return. And here is another one, which is really interesting. This occurred on March 17, 1986, when Andrzej K. looked out the window of his home in Brodnow. Again, this is in Warsaw, Poland, and he saw this strange red sphere. And the second he saw it, he says the back of his head began to throb almost painfully, and this is when he realized he was in telepathic contact with the occupants of this glowing object. And they wanted him to take some photographs of their craft. They told him that there were 17 people on board. So Andrzej, very impressed, quickly retrieved his camera, at which point this red spherical object moved closer, changing colors and shape, becoming now a bluish disk. The ETs told him that they were from the Orion constellation and were researching the presence of aluminum on our planet. At this point, the witness requested to be taken on board, but he was told that this was impossible. But he did take photographs, which the editors of the article in which his experience was published called, quote, true and, quote, extremely interesting. Unfortunately, they were not reproduced with the reprint of the article that I found, and I have not been able to locate them. And here's another. June 27, 1987, several newspapers in Warsaw, including Poland's official army newspaper, said that mysterious objects were seen flying silently over Warsaw. Said one of the witnesses, a pilot, Zolnierz Wolnowski, says, "I saw a plane passing below me with a blue of bright fire trailing it. I was surprised because I should have heard the roar of a jet engine while the plane passed without a sound." Another military pilot said, "Right above us, an object was sailing eastward at an altitude of some 600 yards. It was literally sailing by, as no sound could be heard. Physically, it seemed impossible." Another incident occurred just a few days later, was witnessed by two pilots, one by the name of Lieutenant Marek J., who said, and I quote, "After I got to a distance of 300 yards, I noticed its strange shape. It was something that did not resemble anything flying in the air. The object was an oblong cylinder. He said it seemed to be toying with his jet fighter, and then, as if bored, it sped out of sight." And here's some more recent cases. February 21, 2004 at 2 p.m., a group of friends said that they saw what looked like three triangular objects move over Warsaw. As one of them said, one light was at the center of the plane/ship with a red-orange color and was pulsing. The third ship was bigger than those two described above and had more lights located at the edges. The objects were flying in formation and were looking marvelous. A final case occurred around 1 to 2 a.m. on January 20, 2007, when a fleet of no less than 17 triangular objects appeared over the Służew area of Warsaw. One of the witnesses, a lady by the name of Jolanta, said that she watched them scatter overhead for about an hour. Another witness said that each triangle had three lights, one at each apex of the triangle, with a blue glow around the perimeter. One of the objects was much bigger than the others. She watched them from her balcony, and she said her cats apparently reacted, and her dogs. The cats became frightened, and her dogs started barking. These sound like they might be reverse-engineered craft to me. I don't know, but certainly an interesting and impressive case. So how interesting is that? All these cases from one specific location, and yet no matter where you go, these cases have remarkable similarities. It's pretty clear our military, no matter what country you're talking about, is very aware of what's going on. People are being taken on board all over the world. These cases are just endlessly fascinating to me, and I'm continuing to learn all kinds of things. And now we move to our next location, which is New Paltz, New York. This is by special request of Carolyn. So thank you, Carolyn. This was also a really interesting research project. I found quite a few cases, not quite as many as I thought I would. Lots of anomalous lights, which again, I'm kind of skipping over. We don't learn a whole lot from them, and as interesting as they are, and I do think they're interesting, they're simply not as interesting as people who see solid craft or have more extensive encounters. And I found some, so don't worry, this is going to be pretty interesting. I certainly hope so. Now, I don't have the exact date for this, but this is certainly an interesting tidbit which appeared in the Arkansas Democrat newspaper and comes from Robert S. Carr, a well-known early crash retrieval whistleblower, allegedly in the loop of the UFO cover-up. And he told John Lofton of the Arkansas Democrat newspaper that either the sheriff or the game warden of New Paltz allegedly came upon a UFO and a humanoid. He, quote, managed to catch the humanoid outside his UFO. So this being was retrieved by the CIA and held alive for 28 days at the CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, until it perished. This next case is really interesting. This appeared in the Communion Letters book by Ann and Whitley Strieber. The date is the summer of 1969, and a young lady was returning home from work on the subway when she had an incredible alien encounter. As she says, she's understandably anonymous. In the middle of the 7th Avenue subway rush hour crowd, I saw a little man about 4 feet tall. He had a huge head, but it was the quality of his skin that first caught my attention. It didn't look like human skin, but more like plastic or rubber. I knew he wasn't human. I tried to follow him with my eyes, but he quickly got lost in the crowd. No one else seemed to notice. This disturbed me. I thought I was seeing things. Now, it was just 1 year later, in the summer of 1970, that another experience occurred which gave the witness reason to believe that something very unusual was happening in her life. She was visiting a commune near New Paltz, New York, And as she and her boyfriend sat outside with a group of about 12 people, she says suddenly everybody stood up, as if in a trance, started walking to their cars. And I'll just let her describe what happened. As she says, we found ourselves sitting in our cars, revving the engines, and realizing that we didn't know why we were doing this, but we were unable to stop. Then we all drove off, one car behind the other. I was then with my boyfriend in his van. One of the cars in front of us fell into a ditch alongside the road. The procession stopped, the guys got out, helped push the car back on the road, and we all drove off again. I remember being in a trance and watching the scenery as if it was a movie screen. The next thing I recall is the sky becoming very bright. It was already a sunny day, so it had to be very intense. There was an electrical quality to it. Then I perceived what seemed like the sky opening. A force was coming towards me. The last thing I remember was finding myself outside of the car, lying alongside the road, trembling uncontrollably in fear. My boyfriend was also lying alongside the road, but he wasn't afraid. I'd always thought I'd had some sort of religious experience. Now later the witness had another experience in Woodstock, where she and another person with her heard this loud whirling noise, the room filled with light. It became clear to her that all of these were probably UFO related. Here's another interesting new Paltz case, which occurred at 9:30 p.m. on June 10, 1978, when two students were driving eastbound on Route 299. Suddenly, a dark, wedge-shaped object appeared overhead. They said it had red and white lights on it, and it appeared to be pacing their car, but then it turned south and crossed the road overhead. At this point, they stopped the car. One of the students got out to watch it, while the other stayed inside, but both described this thing as huge, at least 5 times the apparent size of a full moon. They said it was totally silent. Suddenly it, quote, shot off. It went to the southwest and was gone in a few seconds. Now later, 2 other witnesses, separate witnesses, were found, and as can be seen on this map, one witness was at position number 1 at 8:45 and saw apparently the same object. The other witness was at location number 2, this was around 9 p.m., and provided the same description as the other witnesses. The original witness is located at position number 3 on this map. And they were all interviewed by investigators from the J. Allen Center of UFO Studies, QFOS. Really wild accounts coming out of New Paltz, so thank you, Carolyn. Pretty amazing. So many cases. And again, the vast majority of people do not report their encounters. So the cases I'm presenting here should really only be considered as the very, very tip of the iceberg of a huge amount of encounters that we never hear about. Now we move to our next location, which is St. Charles, Missouri. This is by special request of Not So Much. And I have to tell you, didn't find a whole lot of cases here. I suspect there's quite a bit more, but this turned out to be a really difficult area to find cases in. Not because I don't think they're there, it's just that there's a lot of places with the name Charles in it. Charleston and different city names with Charles. And because I do this research by doing sort of a search engine on words like Charles, and too many came up. So I might come back to this, because I did find only a few cases, but the ones I found were certainly interesting, and it proves my point once again. UFO encounters are happening at every location on our planet. Keep telling you, if you want to name your hometown, I'll put it on my list. My list is quite long now. It's hundreds of cases. But I'm working my way down through it and still batting 100%. Okay, here we go. 9:50 a.m., February 18, 1971. The witness in this case is Dr. J.W. Mueller and 2 others, Martin Thole and Theodore Thole. All of them observed a cone-shaped, quote, cage-like object, 10 foot by 10 foot, occupied by one person, made no noise, and moved very rapidly. So yeah, they could see this humanoid inside this thing, which was tipped at an angle and only about 400 feet above the street. They did see what looked like a string of lights or perhaps portholes, which extended partway down the side of this cone-shaped cage-like object. Very odd. 2 years later, another case, 10:40 p.m., June 13, 1973. The witness in this case is police officer Reuben Abington. He had received a call from someone near the Chardin area of St. Charles who said that a UFO was hovering overhead. So, Officer Reuben Abington went to the area, and guess what? He saw the object himself, and he watched it as it hovered, made several 90-degree turns, and moved, quote, with the speed of lightning. And to his amazement, it was joined by another object, and these two objects started playing what looked like tag with each other, flying around a nearby plane, literally flying circles around it, and then a third object joined the other two. This is clearly a display. By this time, a whole group of people had gathered to watch. Later, a call to Lambert Airport showed that the objects had not appeared on radar. Here's a third St. Charles case, September 10, 1998. This was reported to the New Fork National UFO Reporting Center. The witness described a, quote, grayish-silver, cigar-like shape flying across the sky. It was flying very low. There were 3 large porthole windows which illuminated bright white light. Now, the witness said that this object was totally silent and moved in a straight line until it was out of sight. A fairly mundane sighting, if you can call seeing an extraterrestrial craft mundane. So there you go, not so much. Not so many cases. I'm sorry, I'm sure there's a bunch more there. But I got really frustrated trying to wade through all of the data there, trying to find new cases. But I found some, and I will keep looking. Now let's move to our next location, which had a huge amount of encounters. So many that I kind of threw up my hands in the air. I'm like, okay, I'm really going to have to pick and choose on this one. And this location is Boston, Massachusetts. Pretty big city. It's been there for a very long time. This is by special request from Josh Shell. So thank you, Josh Shell. I really am amazed at how many cases I found here. All different kinds. I picked out the ones that I thought were most interesting. A really early case that I have a personal connection to, I found super interesting. But yeah, I think you'll definitely find enough cases here to show that Boston has in fact been visited by UFOs and ETs. Now the first case in Boston is so interesting because as it turns out, this is the first reported UFO sighting in the United States, 1638 Boston, Massachusetts, and it was written about by the Massachusetts Bay Governor John Winthrop, who wrote, and I quote, "In this year, one James Everett, a sober and discreet man, and 2 others saw a great light at night at Muddy River, when it stood till it flamed up and was about 3 yards square. When it ran, it was contracted into the figure of a swine. It ran as swift as an arrow towards Charlton, and so up and down about 2 to 3 hours." So this is a fairly long sighting. Also strange was when this object appeared, the witness's boat reversed direction and moved against the current. I found this case particularly interesting because, as it turns out, John Winthrop, the first man to write about UFOs in the United States, is actually my ancestor. I'm directly related to him. He's my great, many great grandfather. So how cool is that? Pretty interesting for me, certainly. So here's another case. 9:55 p.m. on April 7, 1950, 3 air traffic controllers, 1 a lieutenant colonel in the Air National Guard, were at Logan International Airport when a mysterious light appeared directly over the airport and it immediately began to change colors and perform fantastic maneuvers. It was clearly putting on a display, because it would change from deep blue to pure white and then cherry red while moving against the wind. It then appeared to split into two objects, or one came out of the other. Both began to spin around each other before finally moving off. Now, one of the witnesses was watching all of this through binoculars and said that he saw a solid mass in the light. It was just so bright it was hard to detect. But he said, in part, and I quote, "For obvious reasons, no formal report of this incident was made to any source. One hesitates to solicit ridicule, but I feel it incumbent to submit this report in spite of the risk." What an amazing case that is. And here's another one, an excellent observation of a metallic saucer. This occurred at 6 p.m. on July 22nd, 1952, by an Air Force plane spotter by the name of Robert Hoxie. He was at the Wollaston Observatory on Forbes Hill in Boston, and he noticed a strange object circling around in the sky. And as he says, it looked kind of funny, and I thought it was a plane, and I reported it. But then, after looking closer, I saw that it couldn't be a plane, because it was perfectly round and was going around in circles. I could see it good because the sun was shining on it. I never saw anything like it in my life. I was really frightened. So he's a good witness. It's his job to look at planes. And here's another really interesting daylight disc case, which occurred in Boston, and it occurred at 5:30 a.m. on November 6, 1955. The witness is a gentleman by the name of Mr. Baller, and he noticed a classic gray metallic flying saucer, which zoomed down out of the sky in a vertical position. And as the witness says, I was amazed at the size of this thing. Compared with Boston skyscrapers, it was as large as a 10-story building. So this thing was huge, coming down vertical, but then it quickly assumed a horizontal position, hovered like that for a few moments, then reassumed a vertical position, and darted away at high speed. Now here is a super interesting case which I did report on before in my episode about UFOs over drive-in theaters, but it bears repeating because what a case this is. This was reported to researcher George Fawcett by a radio man who said, and I quote, "One of the technicians came in immediately after the broadcast to tell us of an incident that happened last May 1963 at the Wellington Circle Twin open-air drive-in. He said it was about 9 in the evening and they were watching the movie when all of a sudden their attention was attracted to the sky above the screen. There they saw two disc-shaped objects glowing orange-red. As they watched, the two discs were joined by two more, then two more, until there was 8 in all. Everyone was out of their cars by now, watching as these 8 discs performed for them. They were watched for 45 minutes by all the people at the drive-in, and they gave a better show than was on the billing. When I say performed, I mean he described them as 2 by 2 in formation. Then one would move to the side and up to the top of the formation, the other up the other side, meeting at the middle. But here's another recent case of a solid craft. This occurred on January 21st, 2024, and was reported the next day to Newfork. As the witness says, the UFO was about 200 feet from the ground, causing the ground to shake and emitting a deafening humming noise while flashing lights into our car. My boyfriend and I were sitting in his car in his backyard when the ground started shaking and a loud humming whirring noise began at the same time. The car shook with the ground and a white light flashed into the car. We looked out the window and saw a black, oblong, diamond-shaped craft with 2 white lights located at the ends of the craft and a large green light in the middle. The craft was about 200 feet off the ground, far too close to be an airplane or helicopter. It sped off into the sky, and the humming and shaking faded out with it. So there you go. UFOs over Boston, no doubt about it. Cases reaching way, way back, coming up to pretty much the present day. A lot of activity. It's amazing to me. There's just no way skeptics have a leg to stand on at this point. There's far too many cases. So I kind of just shake my head in wonder when people say, oh, there's no evidence. Yes, there is. There's a lot of it. And frankly, the eyewitness testimony alone should be enough to prove the validity of UFOs and extraterrestrial visitations to anyone who has the ability or the courage to take an objective look at the evidence, throwing away their prior beliefs or what they think they know about what's going on here, and just look at the cases and tell me there's not validity to this. Now let's move to the next location, which is by special request of McBeavers. And this location is Van Horn, Texas. And I have to say, McBeavers, you had me worried there for a second because I wasn't finding any cases. And this was another difficult research project, but I found one, and I'm sure there's more. So this is going to be a brief little segment here. I'm going to keep looking, but this was another area that I've had some difficulty and troubles, real challenges trying to find cases in. Turns out it's not a huge town, and that's one of the reasons. But I found a case, so I'm still going to lay claim to the fact that every location on our planet is being visited, because you haven't stumped me yet. This is a brief case, but widely viewed, quite interesting, fairly recent. It was 11 p.m., July 23rd, 1999. A woman and her husband, both truck drivers, were heading westbound on Interstate 10 directly through the town of Van Horn. She was driving, he was asleep. Suddenly the CB radio started coming alive with reports of a UFO in the area. And as the witness says, I could not get a good look at it, so I woke my husband, who looked out the mirror. He said it looked just like a disc that you hear about when you think of UFOs. It had blue and white lights and was moving back and forth. The white lights were the color of a strobe light, very white and bright. He estimates it was between 1,000 to 1,500 feet off the ground. It was very clear out, and you could make out the shape from all the lights blinking. I would say that there were at least 8 to 10 lights. Everyone noticed, and no one could figure out what it was. It was still there when I left. So there you go, McBeavers. I found a case. Again, it's one, but I'm sure there's more out there, and I'll keep looking, like I said. But I'm still sticking to my guns here. Every location on this planet has a long history of UFO encounters, even if it's just a couple of sightings. So let's move to our last and final location for this episode. And this location is Grand Junction, Colorado. Colorado has a lot of cases. I wrote a whole book on just Colorado UFO incidents. So that gave me a little bit of a leg up here in doing research. This is by special request from Deborah. And Deborah, I think you find these cases quite interesting. Again, I tried to focus on the most interesting cases, not ones of just anomalous lights at night. And I found some really good and unusual ones, particularly one involving an alleged alien artifact. You can make up your own minds about it, but I will certainly present the evidence as we know it. The first really good Grand Junction, Colorado case I could find occurred in 1956. 4 witnesses were overlooking a canyon in Glade Park, just west of Grand Junction, when they heard a very loud whooshing noise. And as one of the witnesses, Ben R. Wertsmith, says, quote, although there were 4 of us, only 2 of us could see 3 round metallic-looking discs. They were moving very fast, probably 500 yards above us. All of us heard the noise, though. They were flying in a formation with the larger one in front and 2 smaller ones to the sides. They were probably in our view for 1 minute or so. So that's strange. There's a number of cases where there's a group of witnesses and only some are seeing the objects. Here's another case, October 26, 1962. A rash of sightings hit the Grand Junction area. 3 witnesses reported seeing white cone-shaped objects hovering in the eastern sky on the western slope. Lots of descriptions of cone-shaped objects. Here's another one 6 years later, April 14, 1968. A man was driving from Grand Junction to Alamosa at about 10 a.m. And at a point between Grand Junction and Delta, he said he saw a shiny object, which reflected a light so bright that it hurt his eyes to look at it. Now, he briefly thought it was a helicopter, but stopped to watch it because it was unusual, at which point it came towards his car and actually landed about a fourth of a mile away just beyond a hill. He said it was round, spinning like a top, reflected the sun, or was giving off a brilliant light. He's not sure which. He stopped to see if it would appear again, but it did not. He estimated it was about 80 feet in diameter, and he said that it appeared to actually strike the hill before disappearing behind it. Here's another one 1 year later, 7 p.m., June 15, 1969. The witness is 14 years old, and he was walking with his brother down Main Street in Grand Junction. And they were on their way to a bookstore when they became distracted by a whistling sound coming from overhead. And as the witness says, "We looked up and saw a silver saucer that had windows and lights flashing underneath it. It wasn't dark yet. It stood there for at least 2 minutes. It was parallel with the Mountain Bell Tower on 8th and Main Street. Then it flew in a flash towards the southern sky." So both the witnesses were very impressed. But as they say, we did not report it because we were afraid people would make fun of us. But 44 years later, at age 58, the witness did decide to report his encounter to the National UFO Reporting Center. Here's a really interesting case of a landed UFO which came into the Sheriff's Department on July 1st, 1982, when an anonymous caller said that he saw this weird craft landing on top of a mountain near the west end of Debec Canyon. He said he saw it around 12:23 a.m. while he was driving along U.S. Highway 6. And he said he saw several other cars watching it too, but they apparently became frightened and sped away. Now, this next case has got to be one of the strangest stories, not only in Grand Junction, but in the history of UFOs. It's fairly well known. If you haven't heard of it, you probably should have. It was around 2 to 3 a.m. one very early summer morning in 1985 when Bob White and his friend Jan were driving near Grand Junction, and Janet first noticed this, quote, strange bright light very low to the ground. She was driving, Bob was asleep, so she woke him up, and she appeared to him to be upset and frightened and asked him if he knew what this light might be. And he told her it was probably connected to the railroad, which was running alongside the highway. He didn't think too much of it, closed his eyes, but a few minutes later, she alerted him again that the light was now as big as the full moon. And coming around a corner in the road, they both saw it, hovering very low over a field. Both were very impressed by this. They turned off the headlights, drove a little bit closer to it down the road, and then pulled over to watch this light, which was now, they estimate, only about 200 feet away. Now, Janet at this point was afraid to the point of tears and begged Bob to leave. But Bob was very curious, so he got out of the car to investigate. He said this object was really bright, far too bright to see any structure behind it. And as he's looking at it, Jan suddenly turns on the car headlights. And as if in response, this object immediately zooms upward and seems to connect to another glowing object. And as Bob says, it looked like two long blue tubular lights, one on top of the other with a space in between. It seemed as though there was an explosion when they connected, and another object was propelled from them. I watched the object, which looked like a fireball, descend back towards me. This object, whatever it was, hit the ground in about the same place that the original light had been. I saw where it hit the hillside, so I followed a groove in the ground, and there it lay. It was still glowing, and I could tell it was hot. So this very much impressed Bob, as you can imagine. He returned to the car, comforted Jan, told her to get out of the driver's seat. He would drive after he checked out this object. She was in no shape to drive. She's still very tearful and afraid. So he looked around in his car for something to pick this object up with. He found a glove and returned to the site. And this object was still there. It was no longer glowing. It had clearly cooled off. And he was able to pick it up. It was slightly larger than his hand, quite heavy, and he carried it back into the car. Now, this artifact would soon become the center of attention in the UFO community and the subject of incredible controversy and, of course, study. Bob began to share what happened with others in the UFO community and with scientists, and he had the object analyzed. In fact, he had it analyzed over and over again in numerous scientific and metallurgical labs. There was a lot of analyses on this object, some of which varied from each other, but readings showed that it was largely aluminum. But none of the labs had ever seen anything like it. They were quite puzzled by its structure, unable to account for it. In fact, some labs took pieces of it and never returned them. And ultimately, it was found to contain a pretty wide variety of elements. It was 85% aluminum, but also silicon, iron, calcium, sulfur, copper, magnesium, zinc, titanium. The list goes on. And metallurgists have offered various opinions, saying it was a natural metallic stalagmite or the result of a plasma ball of lightning hitting the earth. Some accused him of outright fakery, something which Bob vehemently denies. As he says, "I've sunk my life savings into this." And he said he was actually offered $100,000 for this object, which he declined. He did do the whole UFO lecture circuit, showing it off. He later apparently did try to sell it for $1 million. He ended up writing a book about this whole experience, which is called UFO Hard Evidence. It's all about his encounter and his attempts to have this evidence analyzed and explained. And no one has ever satisfactorily debunked this case or explained exactly what this object is. Sadly, Bob passed away in 2009, but the artifact now remains at the Museum of the Unexplained Aerial Anomalies Research Group, headed by Larry Sikander. And yeah, it apparently remains unexplained. On the morning of April 1st, 1989, an Army officer was walking along Redlands Express in Grand Junction, and he says he saw a dark object moving overhead at about 8,000 feet altitude. And after traveling across the sky, this object suddenly dropped down until it was only 50 feet over a nearby rock formation, at which point it seemed to transfer into a brilliant white sphere. It moved about a mile, changed to a brilliant orange, and it hovered for about 10 minutes, then shot upwards back to about 8,000 feet, passing directly underneath a jet aircraft. Wasn't over yet. Finally, it moved north, turned white again, made periodic flashes of light before moving away. A pretty dramatic sighting. In fact, the next day an article appeared in the Rocky Mountain News that the Grand Junction radar system operated by the FAA had experienced software problems that had caused glitches that made it look like there were flying objects over Grand Junction. Sounds a little bit like a debunking explanation to explain radar blips when someone is there actually watching an object. The day after that, the witness said he observed a C-130 plane travel 200 feet above the ground where the object had been hovering. The Army officer, who also worked as a police officer and has been a candidate for public office, believes he saw a genuine UFO. As he says, "What I saw was beyond the scope of our military and industrial machine." Here's another really interesting case which occurred in 1995 when Grand Junction disc jockey Robert St. John was out jogging, and he saw a craft moving overhead. He said it seemed to eject two smaller crafts which moved directly into the ground. That was his impression. But what's interesting about this is it was that same day that Tim Edwards of Salida got worldwide headlines when he captured videotape of a UFO. It's a videotape that would be called among the top 10 footage best footage of UFOs ever captured. It's really quite impressive. Another case 1 year later, June 16, 1996, a couple was fishing at Surface Creek Lake when something very odd happened. Suddenly, their fishing bobber flew 30 feet up into the air, whizzed towards them, and landed at their feet. Something a fish can't make it do. They didn't do it. Something caused this to happen, and it freaked them out. So they grabbed their fishing gear, hopped into their car, and drove off. And as they did, they said they saw unexplained lights hovering at treetop level nearby. It's only a 10-minute drive to their home, but weirdly they said when they got home, it was a half hour later. So they were missing 20 minutes of time. Perhaps this was an onboard encounter or more extensive than just a sighting. Here's another case. Around sunset, September 19, 2004, a man was hunting in the wilderness near Grand Junction when he saw an enormous disc-shaped object flying above two airliners. It really impressed him. He grabbed his pair of binoculars, and he could see that this object was flattish, except it had a large dome in the center, and it was much larger than the planes. So it was huge. And as the witness says, I was trying to understand what I was seeing when 3 jet fighters banked over Grand Junction. One of the jet fighters got on a straight course towards the huge object and hit his afterburners. As the jet approached, the mysterious disc-like object faded away. After the jet moved on, another small star-like object reappeared in the same spot. So this witness thought it might actually be a star until another jet fighter flew right over Grand Junction heading directly for this object, which promptly disappeared. The entire encounter, he says, lasted about 15 minutes. So there you go. That's just a brief glimpse into UFO activity in Grand Junction, Colorado. Quite a few cases there. It's amazing seeing all these cases involving UFO landings and sightings and humanoids. Cases where these craft are being chased by our military. All of it makes it very clear that our governments do know a lot about the subject, far more than they're revealing. While we have had steps towards disclosure, I honestly think it's disingenuous. They know a lot more than they're saying. They have the proof, they have the evidence. And again, what we're seeing here in the public arena is just the very beginning of what's really going on behind the scenes. So I always encourage people to step forward, tell your encounters. You can always be anonymous, but it's important because it's time that the world knows that this is all completely real. We are being visited. There's no doubt about it. And those of you who've had personal experiences, you know this, but it's time that everyone on this planet knows. So that's it for today. That's episode 4 of UFOs in Your Hometown. And again, if you want to give me your location or a location, I'll certainly look into it. Please be patient. My list is incredibly long, but this is fun. I'm having a lot of real interesting times looking into all these different locations and just proving my point. We are all being visited all over this planet. It's very cool. So that's it for now. Thank you once again for watching. I truly appreciate it. Landings, humanoids, car chases, sightings, people being taken on board, the whole deal. It's happening. That's it for now until next Friday. And I want to thank you again. And I'll just close this out by saying, keep asking those hard questions. Keep searching for the truth. It's out there. And most important of all, keep having fun. And I will see you next Friday.